6:15, we'll call this school board meeting to order. I'd like to welcome all the guests in the audience. If your name isn't listed there, we may have to call order for Amy to write down the guests in the minutes. So we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. But if you are able, if you would please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I please have the school board norms read?
To share and respect varied opinions and speak with united voice once a decision has been reached. To prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan. To exhibit a mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparations for meetings and a commitment to board education. To commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for the staff, students, and community of Jamestown.
Thank you for that. We have nothing under public communication. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare? Okay. Before moving on, I'd like to just pause for a moment and look at the attendees and ensure that we have what we need for public record. As you may or may not be aware, when we hold meetings as previous to COVID-19, you sign in the room when you attend, and when you sign in the room when you attend, we're able to record that in the minutes per standard procedures for an open meeting. As we do this via virtual, we still do need to attempt to take that attendance, and most of you do have your names listed, and we do appreciate that. That makes it easier, but there just are a couple that we need to get clarified. Can I have the last name or the full name, excuse me, of the person that has Bowden? Are they able to type that?
What I would suggest is they could just rename. They could
Okay.
On there and rename, and that could be the request that we provide.
All right, that would probably move us along a little bit quicker. For those of you that have used initials or only a first name, if you could please provide your full name for the public record. Thank you. So with that, then we will move on in our agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move.
Motion by Bob.
Second.
Second by Greg. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on into our regular meeting agenda. First is winter athletics recognition. Can I have the basketball recognition, please?
The basketball Indy HSAA Team Scholar Award, the team GPA was 3.2. The girls team finished the WGA regular season in 7th place, but lost to Dickinson in region tournament play in game to end their year. They had a late season loss, the WGA regular season champion Legacy by 6 points, which showed their capability and how competitive the girls WGA basketball conference is as a whole. They finished with a 9-13 overall record and will graduate 4 seniors, but do have quite a few regulars returning that saw extensive play time this past season. All conference named Cameron Selvig and Grace Hagerly, and All-State named Grace Hagerly as the second team. For the boys, their team finished the WGA regular season as conference champions 17-3 and ended up being defeated by Bismarck in championship game of the region tournament. They carried the West region to the number 2 seed going into state tournament and defeated Devils Lake in the opening round of EDC number 3 prior to the tournament being suspended due to the COVID-19 concerns. Blue Jays were scheduled to face West Fargo Cheyenne in the semifinals. At the current time, there is not a plan to reconvene that tournament. Named to the all conference was Bowdoin Skunberg and Carson Lamb. All state was Bowdoin Skunberg for the first team. And other news for the boys basketball, Bowdoin Skunberg was the West Region Outstanding Senior and North Dakota Gatorade Player of the Year and runner-up in the voting for the North Dakota Sports Writers Mr. Basketball. So congratulations to all of those.
Congratulations to all of those players, and we're sad and just probably not as much as you for all of your hard work to show us everything that you had on the court there to be able to finish up. But we are very, very proud of you. Can I please have the recognition for gymnastics?
Jason Rohr here. Gymnastics, North Dakota High School Activities Association Team Scholar Award. The team GPA, which requires a team GPA of 3.2. Our team's GPA was 3.764. WDA and state runner-up to Dickinson posted an all-time high, team high at state meet with a 145.1 team score. Conference championships, Rachel Sheely, bars champion. Haley Nelson, third in all-around state championships. Haley Nelson, second in all-around and state champion in uneven bars. And Rachel Sheely, champion balance beam. All conference, Rachel Sheely and Haley Nelson, Emma Hillerud and Julia Scari. And all state, Rachel Sheely, first team, Haley Nelson, first team, Julia Scari, second team. Congratulations.
Very awesome. Can I please have the recognition for hockey?
For hockey, the North Dakota High School Activities Association Team Scholar Award, Team GPA 3.2 plus. Boys hockey had a 3.216 and girls hockey had a 3.734. Starting with the girls, the hockey team finished the season with a 715 record, which is 9th in state standings, and did not qualify for the state tournament. We lost 4 seniors to graduation and returned our largest class students in our juniors, which is 8, for the next season. The program continues to make strides and is becoming more competitive. The girls suffered a season-ending injury to their goaltender about halfway through the season, just prior to a game that they had won, would have put them into the running for a state tournament berth. Awards included all conference for Ella Rolson, and our coach, Andy Fitzgerald, received the West Region Coach of the Year. So congratulations to the girls. On the boys' side, the boys hockey team finished the regular season as the WDA West Region number 5 team. After losing the opening round in the region tournament, they beat Bottineau Rugby and Dickinson to advance to the state tournament. After losing opening round in a state tournament to East Grand Forks, or East Region, excuse me, number 1 Red River, the Blue Jays defeated Bismarck 4-3 and Minot 4-3 to bring home the consolation championship, 5th place. This was the highest finish for the JHS boys hockey team since a 3rd place finish in 1992, which our coach, Matt Stockert, was Mr. Hockey of that year. All conference awards went to, we had 3 all conference awards, Nolan Nenow of Jamestown, and then we had 2 from Valley City, Jace Thompson and Riley Gerhardt. We did not have any all state team players this year, but just wait for next year, because despite having 3 of the top 10 point getters in the state, it being Nolan Nenow being number 5, Jace Thompson 8, and Hunter Nelson number 9, we hope to see some all states next year. So congratulations to our girls and boys hockey for their season this year.
Great job, everyone. Can I please have boys swimming diving recognition?
This is Diane Hansen. The boys swimming and diving team had a great year as usual, great season. They finished 4th at the WDA Conference Championship hosted by JHS on February 29th, and they finished 9th overall at the state meet held in West Fargo on March 6th and 7th. The squad was a mix of a few upperclassmen with some extensive experience and many younger, less experienced athletes. The numbers in the program continue to hold strong, and the coaches look for some of the younger swimmers to make steady improvement and allow the team to be more competitive in the future. Coach Smith and his staff are doing a great job and are doing the right things within the program to promote a sense of team. As for all conference, Noah Haglund made all conference out of Valley City, and he also made all state first team. So congratulations to Noah and also to the entire team.
Great job. Can I please have the recognition for wrestling?
This is Roger Hout for wrestling, NDHSAA Team Scholar Award. The team GPA is 3.2 plus. Wrestling had 3.465. Wrestling also had quite a memorable season. The team finished fourth in the WDA dueling standings, qualifying them for team duels tournament for the first time since joining the WDA. Finished region tournament in fourth place as a team and 3 individuals as West region tournament runners-up. Aiden Braun, 113, Joel Bowman, 126, and Damian Krebs, 285. The team went on to capture third place honors in the state dual team format by defeating Valley City in their opening round, 47-27, before losing to Minot, 26-40, but rebounding to beat Bismarck Century, 36-27. During the individual tournament in which they finished fourth as a team, the Jays had 9 individual finishes in the top 8 and 1 individual championship. Noah Braun, 152, and 1 state runner-up, Aiden Braun, 113. Numbers in this program are gradually growing and future looks very bright as many of our place winners will be returning next season. West Region Coach of the Year was our Larry Eslake, and Class A Wrestling State Coach of the Year was Larry Eslake. Congratulations.
That was fantastic. And I was very impressed by all of those high GPAs by our student athletes. Job well done. Moving on in our agenda, we have nothing under correspondence. So moving into reports, Dr.-elect, the superintendent's report, please.
Thank you. I do have the written report that you have seen. I think what I'm going to do, if that's okay with the board, is I'd like to talk about the first topic, elementary principal planning, and then stop for discussion at that point, and then continue on with my report if that's okay.
I think that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So you have the board memo in your packets, and I just want to touch on a few points that are some are in there and some aren't, but really the recommendations that address a decrease in staff is never an easy proposition. Of course, people have reached out and expressed opinion on this, and I know that we have an audience of folks listening that feel very strongly about this point as well. Staff change is always challenging. We do, to a degree, get used to the status quo, and oftentimes any change is considered a perceived loss. So the one thing I will say, though, is whenever you have attrition in positions, that's generally the time that we consider staffing and determine if we should continue with the status quo or if there is a need to consider right-sizing your staff. My job, as the board is fully aware, is to make recommendations that I feel are the best options in the best interest of the district and students, and recommendations like these are never taken lightly. There is, as the board may or may not be aware, there are some historical factors that I believe we need to take into context as well. So prior to me becoming superintendent in Jamestown, the district held contracts for what was called the Child Adolescent Services School, or more commonly referred to as CAS. So when the CAS program, which was state funded, was dissolved by the state or defunded by the state, the district really had 2 options. The first was to non-renew all staff in CAS and ask that people apply for open positions. The second option was to absorb all of those positions regardless of need in the district. So the district at that time, which around 10 years ago, opted to absorb all of those positions. Now, we can't go back in time to understand the rationale for why that was the best choice for the district at that time. And I don't want that to sound as if judging that decision. I was not here. Many of our board were not here in any capacity or served in different capacities in the district. And that is not at all a judgment on if that should have been done or not. It's simply a statement of what occurred at that time. But the reason I bring it up is that it does impact the district in a way that I think warrants some level of historical understanding. So one of those positions was an administrative position that became the Washington Elementary assistant principal. That position was eventually changed to a full building principal. Now that decision happened 3 years ago during my tenure, and that was based on the responsibilities that we had Mrs. Clemens, who was serving as that elementary principal, assistant elementary principal, based on her responsibilities and the expectations that we were placing on her was closer to that of other building principals. And so I made that request and the board approved to make that position a full building principal. But so that's why that happened. But it's important to know what happened prior to that. So prior to that, our single section elementary school principals were shared. This existed in a few different iterations. It included a Lincoln Elementary, Louis L'Amour combination, which I think I referenced in my board memo that I wouldn't necessarily advocate. That is 3 sections per level. That would be an awful lot. And I think that would be very, very tough to make manage. Washington in a central office shared position. Now in that designation, Dr. Saxberg, who was serving in that capacity, worked part-time with Washington Elementary and then served as what was called the elementary coordinator. And then Louis L'Amour, Washington is probably the one more people are familiar with and was the most recent. I can tell you it's very, very common practice to share principals within single section or neighborhood schools. In fact, I'm unaware of any Class A school that operates with separate single section principals, although that's certainly possible. I'm not aware of any, but it's certainly possible. Usually a classroom teacher in those shared principal settings is named as an assistant principal and paid a stipend to take on those administrative duties. I didn't call the position in my board memo an assistant principal. I just didn't want to confuse it with the assistant principal position that Mrs. Clemens used to fill, so I called them administrative interns. But in any case, the same idea. So again, very common practice that we used to follow in Jamestown prior to the absorption of CAS. I can say I have no concerns at all with the workload coverage and leadership that would be required to return to a shared principal. Mr. Delzer, who was the recommended administrator that I listed in my memo, has done an outstanding job. I think it's clear to me that he could take on responsibilities and continue to do an outstanding job. And I also feel compelled to share, while it's not a primary variable, there is a significant financial component that the board needs to consider as well. So as I noted in the board memo, maintaining single section elementary principals result in an annual cost, or what would be a continued annual cost, of around $134,000. That's even after you consider the cost of the stipend for the administrative intern that would take on administrative tasks in the absence of the building principal. So the recommendation that I make, that I've made in my board memo to the board, is my plan to move forward unless the board wishes to provide me with a different direction. If the board does not wish to move forward without a full-time person in each building, I would recommend a position similar to how Dr. Saxberg's position was designated, part-time principal, a half-time devoted specifically to coordination of elementary education. And I would add assessment in that as well. Now that could be done full-time at Washington if that were the desire. I think we are certainly at a place that it could maintain to be solely at Washington if that was what worked best. This would provide coverage internally to Washington, and then those responsibilities to elementary ed, again, completed mostly on site. I do feel, again, compelled to tell you that's not the recommended option that I have. I do believe that this is the option that's provided in the memo is reasonable and is the best option to move forward, considering the totality of the district. But I do believe that common ground would also be workable if that's necessary. But with that, I would stand for questions on that topic.
Melissa?
I would just like to reiterate my concern. I know when this was first brought up back at the March 16th meeting, I had voiced my concern about having a shared principal between the two buildings. I've been in a position where my children were at a school where that happened, and it just didn't seem to fit the needs of the students and the faculty. I understand that it looks good on paper that way, but my personal preference would be to have a separate principal in each building and then give further duties to those principals to help fill that time in.
Jason?
Thank you. Jason Rohr here. I would echo Melissa's thoughts in that I think it's so important for us going forward with some of the needs that our students are bringing with them into the school, that we have that physical administrator in the building at all times. I understand, and Dr. Leck's context of the history of this, there was actually only 1 year where there was not a principal in the building. And I don't know the year, but in the halftime here, halftime there thing. So there historically there's been an administrator in the building pretty much at all times. And I do have concerns about an intern with a stipend, because to me that goes to, is that going to be a current teacher in the building, and are we going to be pulling them from their duties and their role as a classroom teacher? And so, yeah, I would be for the model that we used before with Mr. Saxberg. I just really think that this is a crucial decision. Not only do our kids have increasing needs, our staff needs increased support at the building level. And I would really just strongly encourage us to reconsider this at this time.
Diane?
Yes, I had wanted to comment on Jason's questions about, my concern is the teacher interns or we're calling them administrator interns, that would be happening in the buildings. I would want to know how many there are, who is aware that they are the responsible person for that day. Would the students know? How many do you plan to put in each building? I see that you would have an interview process to select them, which is good. But I do have concerns that there are just too many people in charge here when the administrator is not in the building. And I do share the concern that a building without an administrator in it is a building that's operating below capacity, you might say. So I do share concerns. I certainly see what is happening here. I understand that it's happened before. And I'm not positive how I'm going to vote on this, because it is a crucial issue. And in an ideal world, we wouldn't even have a question about this. We would put a principal in each building. But I just want to know about those assistants, those interns.
I could respond to that question if it's all right. Administrative interns, the idea would be modeled on all the other districts that share principals. And again, it's a pretty common practice. But that would be one individual designated at each building, and they would be responsible for those items when the building principal is not on site. So it would be one individual. The building principal would interview any interested candidates and make a selection at each building.
Okay, I want to piggyback on that. Say a parent shows up who really wants to talk to the administrator. Would they be pulled out of a classroom, and who would cover that classroom while they're dealing with something that's happening in the building?
So a situation like that, we're lucky we're a Class A school, but we're not a very big town. We would certainly have the opportunity to ask to have that building principal come on site or talk to an individual on the phone. I think we could make that sort of scenario happen pretty quickly.
Okay.
When you're sharing between two locations that are really very close.
Okay, thank you.
Bob?
Yeah, just to comment on, to go back to Dr. Saxberg, when he was a part-time central office administrator, part-time at Washington. He spent a significant amount of time at the central office when he was doing that job. So I think Washington has had a part-time principal, and I'm not going to say how many years, but several years off and on. Louis also, when Jake Wolf was the principal there, he also had central office responsibilities. When you have I agree with what Mrs. Hanson said. In an ideal world, with every building would have a full-time principal, but when you get down to 100 kids, 110, something like that, you really have to take a look at the position when you have an opportunity to do something that can make the district more efficient. And if you have a good person, Dr. Leck feels that the principal could handle both schools, I think it's something we have to take a hard look at. And I think there's enough of a track record here in this district of having principals in two buildings that we know that it works, that it's not, is it ideal? Obviously not, but it does work, and it can work well if you have the right people in place. And according to Dr. Leck, and I trust his judgment, we do. So it's a little bit about cost savings, obviously. It's also about efficiency. And I think this is something we have to take a hard look at.
Roger?
Now, is it like Diane said, in a utopia, I mean, we'd have a principal in every building, but in that perfect world, we'd have all those students in a brand new facility. I mean, the number of students that are in both those facilities could be accommodated into one new facility. And another thing we have to look at too is the savings would be secondary to the care of the kids, but the taxpayers, they've, over the years that we've had the failed referendums, and we need to be doing more facility work and so on, the savings there, annually would be a significant amount of money that could be used towards some of those repairs and so on.
Greg?
Thank you. I guess in trying to fully understand as we look at the responsibilities that Mr. Saxberg currently has, and he works in the central office. So you're saying that he could perform those duties while being at Washington. So how much would that take away from what he's currently doing?
So Greg, just for context, I was using Dr. Saxberg when he was here and had that position. He served as a part-time principal at Washington, and then physically actually came over to central office and fulfilled the central office duties of the elementary principal or the elementary education coordinator. Now, the proposal that the other option that I provided was similar to that. At least that's what I would recommend, some kind of common ground. If that's the direction that the board wishes to move, is to have a person on site at Washington full-time, because that would be consistent with what's happening at Louis L'Amour. And that person would have central office responsibilities similar to what Dr. Saxberg had, but they would all be conducted on site. but there would have to be some scheduling of responsibilities. I'm sure the reason why, as Mr. Toso said, there was another individual that had central office responsibilities at Louis and Dr. Saxberg. I'm sure the reason that they came to central office was because of it was probably easier to get work done at the central office. But they would just have to carve aside some time and make that work in their schedules if that was the option that the board had preferred.
Heidi?
When Phyllis turned in her resignation, as we commented, she's going to definitely be a loss to our district, and we really appreciate her service. I've been on the board for some years where I've been through a few of these different iterations, and I think maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like even some of the class size at one of the schools has even decreased some since then. But wondering if we do move forward with this, could we, because I'm even thinking right now, it's, we're into May, and, advertising and interviewing and those kinds of things. If we were to go forward with a shared principal, could we, if the board decides to do that, could we do like a survey of like parents and teachers in the building and those kinds of things, some of the stakeholders that are directly affected, and after next spring, and just kind of see how it's going, and we could always make a different adjustment at that time. I guess it was my thought if we decided to move forward with this.
Jason?
I'm glad Heidi brought up that the stakeholder input. I mean, to me, it seems like the time for that would be now, before a decision is made. And I don't know if any of that has taken place at the building level, but I sure would like to see it. And then comments were made as, the historical context of this, and it's worked in the past, and that leads into the whole discussion of building. I would venture to say that there were parents, staff who felt it didn't work all that well. And that's a lot of stuff that has to be weighed out. And then just one more point on the memo itself is that the memo doesn't really point out the pros or the cons of this. I mean, the money savings obviously would be welcome, but this is something I don't think you can put a price on. And then the teacher to staff ratio, obviously makes sense if you look at just that, but that doesn't illustrate the value, again, of having one administrator in the building. Obviously, it makes sense if you just look at the ratios, but there's some unquantifiable things, I think, to this. And I think it's a heavy decision that needs to be made. So there are options out there, I think.
And just a quick response to that too, Jason. I think almost any time that you are recommending a staff reduction of any type, it's almost universally not desired. Whether it's the right choice or not, it's universally generally considered to be felt like a loss. Again, as I said earlier, perceived as a loss because it's a change. And you can assume that that's a very, very high rate of we prefer to keep what we have. And that's in almost any staff recommendation. And so that's, I could guarantee you that that's the feedback that we would get if we sent out a survey that says, no, we want to keep what we have. And again, that's pretty standard.
Steve?
Yeah, I guess I would just echo what some of the others have said, where I would support or be in favor of a person there all the time and giving them other duties. I don't know if we've looked at possibly other administrative roles that might be retiring in the near future that we could plan to give to those people. And as far as Mr. Delzer is concerned, I've had opportunity to deal with him plenty, and he is more than capable of doing of handling both schools. My concern would be his time, I guess. My impression is that he's only at Louis maybe half of the time already, just because of all of the administrative things that they do besides being in the classroom and dealing with students. And splitting him between two schools is going to, now we're looking at maybe a quarter to a third of his time rather than being there all the time. So I think those are issues that we have to consider.
Diane?
I'm glad Steve brought that up, because I was going to ask, I don't need to be privy to the whole conversation, but Mr. Deltzer's feelings on this, has he ever done it before? Does he think it can work? Does he feel up to the task? But I think everyone's answering that, yes, he does. But if you have any insight there. And the second thing I'd want to make a point on is this is a result of a failed referendum. And what happens is that the board has to make tough decisions because the public wants us to go in this direction. We would have joined these two schools and made a new facility, and it's just not going to happen. And now we're in a position of having to make something work that we never intended to have to make work. So I just want to make that point that this isn't an easy choice, and it's a choice that we never wanted to have to make. So just a comment for the record.
Yeah, regarding Mr. Delzer, of course, we had conversations, or I had conversations with Mr. Delzer in the past, and then again when the resignation came. And he is a very professional administrator, and he knows that he's going to fulfill we know that he's going to fulfill whatever role is asked of him to the utmost professional degree. He would do a fantastic job. And I'm sure, just like anybody else, I like what I do and I feel comfortable with what I do. That's a different thing than I'm definitely willing to take on a challenge and take on something that's for the betterment of the district. And he definitely has communicated that he has a willingness to take on that kind of responsibility and feels like he can adequately and very strongly take that on.
Okay, thank you.
Heidi?
No, you're still muted.
There. Yep. And I do agree with you, Diane. I think, the district had done some planning for this. It just didn't work out with the failed referendum. We'd, planned to expand Louis L'Amour and make it a school similar to all the other elementary schools in our district. And just to make sure everybody is aware, both these Washington and Louis are half the size or less than half the size of our other grade schools. And so, our plan to equalize that out was in motion, but with the failed referendum, and then not knowing where we're going to go in the future does also make this a little more challenging, and could give us less flexibility, I guess.
Bob?
I appreciated what was mentioned here, especially Dr. Larson's comment that a year from now we can always take a look at this, and if it doesn't seem to have worked very well, we could make a change at that point. Also, without being overly negative, I think the district education in the next biennium is going to look at some very difficult financial positions. Certainly the state is not going to be awash in cash, and the next legislative session, I think, is going to be brutal. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. And we could be faced with some very difficult decisions. And it's always easier to not fill a position that's vacant than it is to fill a position and then later on have to let someone go or have to make cuts. And board members, I hate to go back. I've tried very hard not to talk about my past situations in our district or in other districts, but I've been involved in having to cut staff as an administrator. And I'll tell you what, when you have to call someone into your office and tell them, I'm sorry, we don't have a job for you next year. And by and large, that's the younger person. That is not something you want to do. And as board members, we're going to have to, and again, I'm trying not to be negative here, but as board members, we have to try and look to the future, and cost cutting is never easy. And I agree completely. People want to keep on with what we have. No one wants to see cuts, but it's easier when you do it through attrition rather than do it through non-renewals. So I'll just point that out for some thought. Thanks.
Diane.
Thanks, Mr. Toso, for that, because I just last night was answering questions from the Jamestown Sun, since I'm running for re-election, and they talked about pressing issues. And I think Bob's comment about what the future holds as we survive and move forward from this pandemic, the funding is definitely going to be an issue for anyone who is serving on this board over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think he is absolutely correct that terminating someone as opposed to lapsing their position when it's there to be lapsed is a far different creature. And we really have to consider that when we vote, because things are not going to get rosy for a while. And we are going, especially with these failed referendums, we're going to have to make some tough decisions as a board, and this may be our first one. And with that, I will turn it over.
Steve?
That's an excellent point, Bob, about having to cut staff, but the proposal does suggest that we would add another, I forget the term now, instructional coach. So I guess there'd be a possibility we would have to cut them eventually too. But I just had one question in regard to having a shared principal. How much time do you think that they would be driving around during the day? Just the proximity of the two schools, it's unfortunate. I mean, if it was, if Lincoln and Washington were the single section schools and it was just a couple blocks away, that would make a big difference even in this decision in my mind.
Yeah, so really two questions or two things to comment on in there. The first is I referenced in the memo that the board should consider earmarking the savings towards the future in maintaining the instructional coaches that we have now as part of the Now Striving Readers Grant, the $1.25 million grant we received that we're in the middle of, and the closed grant, the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant that we received just recently that extends our current instructional coaching all the way through 2025. So that's our intent. That was the intention of that statement, just to be real clear about that. It's maintaining the staff that we've already taken on in terms of instructional coaches through those $2.5 million in grants. And so that's just to clarify, and that would be a decision that we can't envision what the financial outlook is going to be in 2025. It's tough to see in the biennium what things are going to look like, much less in 2025. But that was the idea of that statement in the board memo, was just to say maintaining, this might be a pathway to maintain some of what we've already established, is a good use of staff in instructional coaches that we have right now. So just to clarify that. The second piece is what would that look like and how much would they be driving? It's really kind of hard to say. I suppose that depends on the day, the week, the month. That could all change based on what's happening in the schools at that time. But what you would envision is that you would have designated office time. The principal is going to be at Washington on this day or in this afternoon, in that afternoon, and it's scheduled throughout the week. And so that's standardized. And then if issues arise and that principal needs to be at the other single section building, then they could make that travel and make that work, because priorities change based on whatever it is that the principal is dealing with. But the idea would be that unless it's a necessity, that intern or would handle that issue at that time. And I think that's the bulk of what we're talking about, is the stuff that just arises on the fly that can be managed through somebody else, not the big stuff.
Roger.
I just wanted to make a comment about, there was some talk about the legislators and so on coming up and the decisions they're going to be making. And as far as funding is not going to be looking good, the governor has not just said that everything's going to flatline, but there is other agencies and so on. He's looking at a good major percent of cutbacks. And so they're going to be reducing budgets. Granted, education is held somewhat, like Rob says, somewhat harmless, but it's still there's going to be probably no increase there. And we're going to have increases of other things that are going to go on. So just something to think about on that.
Diane, did you have your hand up? Okay, no. Jason?
Just one more quick question for Dr. Leck, and maybe you don't know the answer, but so would you see Mr. Delzer assuming all of Mrs. Clemens' portfolio, or would there be a reshuffling within the district or too premature?
Yeah, we would have to look at that. I guess I couldn't answer that. If that's the direction that we go, we would have to look at who's taking on those responsibilities. So some of that would be yes, some of it would be no, or some of it would be reshuffling. I think it just depends on the workload that, and again, when we're looking at a single section principal versus a multi-section principal, that there's a significant amount of work burden difference between a single section and a multi-section principal. And that's one of the things that we're trying to consider here too, is trying to even out that workload in the best possible way that we can. And, as other people mentioned, we're trying to make efficient recommendations. That's what my task is. That's what my job is. I bring a recommendation that I feel is reasonable, that is efficient, and that I believe is workable. Sometimes when we look at one piece of the pie, the answer seems very obvious. And when you look at the whole pie, the answer seems less obvious. In a perfect world, we certainly could continue to do certain things. But again, that's looking at one piece of the pie versus the whole pie. And that's where I got to that recommendation. Now, is it workable to say we could absorb that position as a part-time central office? And, if you remember from the very first strategic plan that we drafted during my tenure here, one of the recommendations from that 80-person committee was to hire an assistant superintendent. So it's not like the work is not there to be done. It's just, again, has that ever been the most efficient use of district dollars? And we never brought a recommendation like that forward, even though it was in the strategic plan, because it wasn't the most efficient use of those limited dollars. And that's, to be honest, at a piece of a component of these decisions as well. When we are tasked with making staffing changes, those are always tough choices. They always are. And there are ramifications of the decisions that we make from a financial standpoint too. And again, that's not the primary driver for decisions, but it is something that we need to consider. And that's something I needed to consider in making what I felt was the best recommendation for the board. And obviously we're hoping for some level of consensus and direction, because if I had that from the board, then I would know from a superintendent's perspective what my next step was. Is my next step to work to reshuffle those responsibilities, as Mr. Rohr had suggested that we need to do, which is accurate? Or do we post a position and look for that next principal / central office, or whatever that position is? The sooner we make that decision, the better. And that's why we made a recommendation, or that's why I'm making a recommendation to say that's what I feel is the best movement forward. If that isn't, or if we don't have consensus on that, then we need to have some kind of decision to make, to give me some direction as far as what to do, because they're very different things. Either we're hiring somebody or we're reshuffling. We don't need to issue a contract or hold interviews outside of the administrative interns, if we're sharing Mr. Delzer to two locations. But we do need to act quickly if we aren't. So,
Steve?
Hopefully this is the last thing here, but or from me anyway. all would qualify for this position? I guess, would it be all licensed staff, or I'm just curious if, a counselor or something like that could do this, simply from the standpoint of pulling classroom teachers to deal with unruly students, or unfortunately unruly parents, maybe, taking them away from the classroom. If it was one of our special ed teachers or something like that, their kids could be shuffled back to the classroom, and they could deal with that without leaving kids, without a teacher. I guess I'm just curious who all can apply for this or be considered for it.
Well, I would envision it to be all certified staff. And I think there are some inherent issues with using specialists for a few different reasons. I mean, sometimes those are staff that are with the neediest students, and they may have the least amount of flexibility. Sometimes those are shared positions. We're speaking of shared positions, we share counselors too. And we do that based on student enrollment. And again, is it the best to have a full-time counselor in each building? Well, of course it would be. But that we don't do that, we share those positions because that's what is the most efficient and makes the most sense for the district. But I would say it's likely to be a classroom teacher. But it could be any certified person that applies. And again, I think I stated this already, but as Mr. Delzer, those people would apply internally for those positions, just like they do for other ancillary contracts or auxiliary contracts like coaching positions. They would apply, they would be interviewed, and the best person would be selected by Mr. Delzer.
Greg?
Yeah, I guess this is the point I was trying to make when we made the reference to Mr. Saxberg. Do we currently have a position that would be partially administrative, doing administrative duties and being located at the school? I guess that's really what I was trying to figure out, or is that a new position that we would need to hire for?
So good question. Thank you for the clarification. Well, really what I would envision is this person, if that's the route we go, would be at Washington full-time and taking on principal responsibilities, but would absorb some of those other portfolio assignments that were shuffled to other elementary principals when Dr. Saxberg's position was left the district. When that position ended, those responsibilities got shuffled to the Gustner principal, the Roosevelt principal, the Louis L'Amour principal, absorbed into central office. And the vision would be to return to that kind of model. If we do continue to have a full-time person located at that building, that person would have to take on some of those responsibilities. Now, some of those Mrs. Clemens already had, like assessment coordination. That's something that would have to continue. Perhaps EL, which Mrs. Clemens has, but there's other responsibilities that the multi-section building elementary principals have had to take on. That could be a talented and gifted program. That could be the marketplace for kids. There's lots of different responsibilities that we have shuffled off to building principals. And some of those, or a good chunk of those, would have to be restructured based on the time allotment that we're asking for central office. So that would, in some ways, ease the burden on those multi-section principals as well, because they're doing multi-section administration plus these other side responsibilities.
So all of those duties currently are being maintained. And if Mr. Delzer were to hold both positions, he would not only hold both positions, but then he would take on extra duties. Or would those extra duties maybe be dispersed again?
Well, we'd have to look to reshuffle to see what makes the most sense. It really just depends, but you would have to, again, look at the workload and what could be reshuffled. And we might have to take different responsibilities at central office if that's the case. Like assessment coordination, for example, if there's a shared position, that probably doesn't make sense to have any of the elementary principals. Now, if there are 4 elementary principals instead of 5, that would have to be a responsibility that gets absorbed somehow into central office. That might be my responsibility or Mr. Hagelin's responsibility or a shared responsibility some other way. But we would just have to look and try to even out that workload burden.
Any other comments?
So just mine, I'm looking for some level of consensus unless we need to bring this back as an action item for the board to consider.
Bob?
I'll make a motion that we go with Dr. Leck's recommendation and having shared administrators at Washington and Louis L'Amour.
I'll second that. This is Roger Hout.
So any further discussion? Heidi?
I'm in favor of seeing how this goes for the next year. I don't think any of us can predict what the next year is going to look like, and even how much we're going to be in school or out of school. I mean, it's just really unknown at this point. So I'm in favor, but I would like, since it is a pretty dramatic change, I would like this reevaluated in the spring, just to see how the process went, just to feel if the teachers and parents and students just really felt an absence, of a principal, then we can have further discussion and reevaluate at that time, and we can start a little earlier on a hiring process if we choose to do that.
Steve?
I guess Heidi probably just said what I was thinking, but is there any way to move forward and guarantee some sort of formal reevaluation of that, or how would we do that, I guess?
We could amend the motion for that it's for the school, a specific term. We could provide an amendment, or also we wouldn't necessarily have to amend this specific motion. It could be provided during the budgetary cycle, looking at personnel. So there's 2 different ways we could do it. Dr. Leck?
Just a comment. I appreciate what the board is looking to provide direction. When my concern would be is that this was a report item and it wasn't on the agenda, and I get a little bit concerned about there's some input here. When it's on a public agenda, it's an action item and it's very clear what's happening. This is a report, and the hope was that 9 board members say, boy, that makes total sense to me. We don't need any other direction. That makes sense. Let's move forward. And that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing different opinions and different options. And I think if we, there is a motion and a second, there's a few different ways to handle that. You could certainly proceed if you want to. I don't think that that's probably the best option for, I think what you could do is you could table and then move forward at the next meeting. Of course, the tabling means you have to move only to the next meeting, and that would provide time for that to be on an agenda and to have a greater level of feedback. Or you could just withdraw the motion and we could act on it again. Again, my thought was making the initial recommendation. If everybody's on the same page or reasonably can say, yes, I can support that. Well, we don't need a motion because if somebody resigned and we're just moving forward. But changing responsibilities, other options would probably require, probably would require some action. And I think if you're going to do that, it makes the most sense to post it as an agenda item and then follow protocol that way. And again, I'm just providing a little bit of insight and recommendation there.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but can't this come up under new business at this meeting?
It could. This is my board report, though. It's not.
Right, right. But when we get to, I'm saying we wouldn't have to wait till the next meeting, correct? I mean, we sure could, but it could come up as a motion under new business.
It absolutely could. My point was we haven't posted it that way. And I think how we've done items in the, made decisions in the past, there has been a posted item. People know exactly what the board is acting on. And I think it's just from a public, you know, the public to me has, when we have enough time, it would seem very, very reasonable that we would put that as an action item. So
Okay,
people
that's
know
fair.
exactly what the board is doing.
Okay.
Heidi? Are you good? Okay, Roger?
Just,
I'm in agreement. So that's all that
Okay.
it wasn't on the agenda, and for transparency. I don't know that I
Okay.
agree.
Roger?
Moving forward with the motion.
if Bob would withdraw his motion, you're probably looking just for like a thumbs up on either way of whether we want to have a person shared or do we want a full-time person there.
So what I was hoping for is, Mr. Howe, thank you for that. What I was hoping for was that all 9 people would be on the same page. And that's, and that clearly isn't the case. And I don't even know if we need to, you know, I don't want a straw hat poll. You know, I think that's the place where we want a motion. But to me, I wouldn't feel comfortable with moving forward with something like this, knowing that there's very strong, varied opinions. And it is going to require a vote to get some direction. And that should be an agenda item is my point. And again, I do appreciate what, you know, the motion and the second, it's really just trying to give me direction, which is what I asked for. I just think the process should be to follow it through as we would any other action item.
Greg, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. And I agree with what's been said. I think with the discussion that's come out, I don't think we're ready to make this decision right now. I don't think there's enough information for us to do it, especially when you made the point of freeing up some of the work that the other principals have, which would make them more effective as principals in their buildings. I like that idea a lot. The other point I would make is after you make a second, technically the motion is on the floor. So I don't know if you can withdraw it without having a vote unless we consider it completely out of order at this point.
Bob?
We can move the table.
Yeah.
And that would cut off debate. Before I do that, I might want to I want to suggest that we consider, we talked earlier about having input from the public. And I know I got 2 emails today. I don't know if there are other emails that were floating around. Somehow consider, if we aren't in violation of the governor's edicts, that our next meeting be held in the conference room, so that if people want, I don't know how else we're going to go about getting input from individuals. If we can't do it, we can't. I'll just leave that up to administration, but that's just a suggestion. And with that, I move the table, the motion.
Second.
Unmute your mics, please. All those in favor of tabling the original motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. To the effect of bringing up public comment, I think even on our next board meeting, which would be May 18th, the social distancing guidelines will still be in effect. The school buildings will in effect still be closed per the governor. So having those come in physically in person, more than likely, I can say Ferdy definitely will not be able to happen. So Dr. Leck, how would you best want people to provide us?
If you look at the public participation policy, it states pretty clear on how to proceed. And that means that the item has to be an action item, it has to be on the agenda. And it has to be provided within a time frame to either the board president or myself. And it very, very clearly states that it has to be the superintendent or the board president. That's who receives those requests. And so when we know those, then they can, then that's an option. And again, I just think, as Dr. Larson said, there's the transparency of big decisions like this. That is certainly I'm appreciative of that decision to make sure that that's an action item, that instead of just a item on a report.
Okay, so yes, Dr. Leck.
Sorry, one more comment. So when we do these online, the question was, I think Mr. Toso asked, well, how does that work in this? So if you notice that there's panelists and there's attendees. Attendees are people that log in. They're not board members or the staff that generally have to respond to questions like myself, Sally. So the attendees, if they follow that participation policy, they could then during public participation be granted access to speak to the board. So the same option exists as would exist in the Thompson Community Room. It's just done virtually. So if somebody fills out that form and it is it's an item on the agenda and it's provided to the board president or myself, then that person could discuss that item with the board. It's just like anything else. They could be limited to time, which is something that generally happens. Obviously nobody could say anything that was out of order, but that's the path that exists, and that could certainly still exist in this setting.
And then also, of course, if an individual didn't want to do the public comment type of format, they could still email the board or Dr. Leck as well. Jason, did you have a further comment? And then
or in this, the requirements for addressing the school board, there's two. I'm assuming those are somewhat standard. I was reading those today and I was just a little confused as to why because it makes no sense to me that our agendas come out Friday, yet the deadline to submit that is the Wednesday prior. So I don't know if we could just go down to the 2-hour thing or what, but we can have that discussion some other time.
Okay, thank you.
Public participation, that is the policy 2 hours prior to. That is the policy that we're referring to, that's public participation. And that refers to an item on the agenda.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for that very important discussion and that direction of needing to bring it as a vote, not just a recommendation. We do appreciate everyone's views, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to everyone's views and being respectful. With that, Dr. Leck, could you please move on in your report?
Okay, thank you. So I have a few other items. Again, it's a written report, just like you've already seen, but just to touch on a few items. Later on in the agenda, you'll be asked to rescind a leave of absence request. One of the requests that you approved for a leave of absence earlier in the year was for Tracy Gustafson. She has applied and has has interviewed and then been the recommended candidate for the open Title I position. So to do that, she would rescind her earlier request for a leave of absence. If you approve that, then she would be considered hired. It is kind of a different situation because she has a continuing contract. So you would not approve her hire because of that continuing contract. You would approve her rescinding her request for leave of absence. Hopefully that makes sense. I could certainly clarify if necessary. We do have 2 additional hires. Darian Lund is an undergraduate, received an undergraduate degree in instrumental and vocal music from North Dakota State University, has most recently taught at Oak. She would be taking over the position vacated by Mr. Bondley for JHS band. And then Sarah Hofschild is most recently hired in the same position, early childhood special education. at Bismarck Public Schools as the position that she is replacing, Tammy Marler, who has the early childhood special ed assignment at Gustner Elementary. Later on in the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about graduation planning and end of the year planning. So I'm not going to talk about that here unless there's any questions that don't come or that are separate from this discussion. Grading in the pandemic, we, as a school, we've had a lot of really, really interesting discussion about grading and how to make that work. And schools across North Dakota, really across the country, have struggled with how to best assess and most equitably record grades for students during this extended closure. We've never dealt with anything like this in recent times. And so it makes it a real challenge. The reality is the fourth quarter is in our district. We've really tried to maintain the expectations, continue to prioritize mastery of standards and learning. But the reality is fourth quarter is not the same. It doesn't represent the same learning as what happened in quarters 1 through 3. Now, have our teachers done an amazing job? Absolutely. They have absolutely knocked it out of the park, and they are doing a fantastic job. But districts have struggled with how to be consistent with grading policies and practices in the fourth quarter when expectations change. I can tell you what the majority of districts have done in the state of North Dakota is they focus that fourth quarter almost solely, if not solely, on engagement. And that means, are they making attempts? Are they checking in? Are they attending sessions? Are they attempting to complete work? And that is the extent of fourth quarter grading. Now, in our district, we're looking at that a little bit differently. Of course, it depends on the grade level. You treat kindergartners differently than you treat AP high school students. But the reality is we felt that you can provide grace in grading and that we can maintain holding academic expectations along with engagement. Is engagement important? Absolutely. We have kids coming from vastly different backgrounds and vastly different situations at home. And we want to make sure that when we're assessing, we're making the right assessment. Our youngest or some of our most vulnerable students might absolutely be primarily assessed on engagement. But as kids get older, we want to focus less, again, in our district, we want to focus less on engagement and consider it a factor, but not the only factor. And so how we're dealing with grading is for non-credit bearing classes. So that is most of the classes K through 8, although there are some foreign language, for example, would receive grading, and they're going to be treated exactly like the high school classes. So all non-credit bearing classes will be recognized as a satisfactory or unsatisfactory. And then the final grade would be representative of the average quarters 1 through 3. Because the fourth quarter is so different, we did not feel like it could be averaged along with the other quarters because it's simply different. Final grades, again, averaged of quarters 1 through 3. For students in credit-bearing classes, they will use the traditional grading system. And again, that's different. That's not happening in a lot of districts. A lot of districts are simply taking an engagement score. But we have made that option because we do believe it's important to continue on with that academic content for credit-bearing classes. And then we felt like we have had accommodations in grading that can accommodate or that can take care of when we do continue on with our grading scale. And again, the high school plan does still recognize engagement as part of the overall grade. It's just not the sole focus. And I'd be happy to answer questions. I'll just continue on with the other part of the report and then stand for questions at the end. Food service continues to do really amazing work. We're getting between 650 and 750 breakfast and lunches each day, which is outstanding work. Anywhere from 50 to 70 of those are usually delivered. We have provided a handful of meals to adults, but I'll be honest, there just hasn't been a significant interest of that, even with delivery. And it seems like we've tried some different strategies and it's just not a high level of interest. and I just got these numbers today, so it's very timely, but almost 17,000 meals since this process began, and almost 17,000 meals. So I think that's really amazing. We do have the opportunity to continue to do exactly what we've been doing in terms of lunches. And that would continue with the waiver of our hot lunch program all the way through the end of June 30th. You know, we're really still in the planning stages of what that might look like. It's going to have to be different. We wouldn't have the same level of staffing. We wouldn't be able to afford that. You know, we have to continue to think of June or after our school year is a little bit differently, but we're still trying to see how we could make that work. But we really would have to make that break even. I will tell you, the cost of food service and providing meals out as we have has resulted in the need for us to devote a fairly significant portion of those CARES dollars, which is what they're intended for, and that's fine. To food service, we're going to bring up some dollars, and when we make that formal approval, that of course comes before the board. But we're probably going to put around $120,000 of those CARES dollars back into food service. They have spent almost down to bare bones, and they will be essentially at a break even, no carryover after May, because they continue to lose money every month. Even with the dollars that come in through the food service for the meals that we are providing, it doesn't really come anywhere close. They're losing out on the supersizing. They're losing out on a lot of the adult and paid meals. They're losing out on the snacks that are sold, and those are significant drivers for them to make dollars and keep the food service at the lowest cost possible. And so that's really going to be something that we have to look at over the next month or so to determine how we're going to do that. But the beautiful thing is, though, with that waiver, we believe that we can make that work and really have that be a wash in terms of dollars and expenses to revenue. But we will have to make some limits in terms of staffing, maybe sites that are provided, maybe some delivery options, but it's still going to be able to continue. And I think that's going to be really a good program that we want to continue to do. But with that, I'll stand for questions.
Jason?
Might be too early to tell, but do you have any idea of what that shortfall might be in the food program?
Yeah, it's exactly what I said earlier. Maybe I didn't state it in a very clear way, but about 110,000 is probably what that is. And again, where that comes from is they make a significant amount of their revenue on paid meals, on on the volume of meals, plus the paid meals, the snacks, the supersizing. That all enhances their budget. And with only putting out 750 meals, they just don't have the volume to keep up, and they've had those costs every month that have continued to dwindle. I wouldn't change the program for a second. We're providing out really important meals, and that's what the CARES program exists for. But when you start doing the math, it was even a lot more than we anticipated.
Well, thank you to all of our staff for putting in that time on that. That's important.
Any other comments related to the end of the superintendent's report? Oh, Melissa?
Not sure if this would be the appropriate time to ask it, or if I need to wait until the what am I trying to say here? If I need to wait until the new hire contract comes up to ask the question, but because it's on the report, am I able to ask the question now, or do I need to wait until later?
You can ask now, but if we need to wait to address it, we can just let you know that we'll address it later. You can ask it now.
Just had a real quick question on Darian Lund. It says that she's been working at the Oaks Public School District. Has that been at the high school level, or has that been elementary?
No, I believe that's at the high school level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa, for that question. Anything else?
just a
Dr. Leck?
clarification too, and Melissa, with you asking that question, that made me think that others might have the question about contracts. And this is not an individual that has a contract. Took this position or was offered this position, so didn't sign the contract. So it's not a needing to seek out or release a contract situation.
Thank you for that clarification. Sally, did you? You're on mute. Nope, you put yourself back on mute.
Melissa, I can look that up and, and then when it comes up for vote, I can have that information for you.
Thank you for that. Okay. With that, I think we're ready to move on in our agenda. We have nothing under board education and nothing under old business, so we'll move into new business. Under activities and grounds, activities, can I have a motion to approve a co-op agreement with Carrington Public Schools for soccer?
Madam President, this is Roger Hutt. I move that we approve the co-op agreement with Carrington Public Schools for soccer.
Steve Veldkamp seconds.
Any discussion? Heidi?
There, okay, got me unmuted now. I have a question. With this adding additional players, we have a lot of numbers out for soccer, and just one for boys soccer anyway. Just wondering, are we adding a junior high program, or what's the motivation of the agreement?
So the request came from Carrington to the activities director, and that recommendation came through to central office to look to continue a program. If there's numbers issues, I suppose we would look at it at that time. If there's a necessity to have a different program, that would be considered at that time. I don't know how many. This might be one student. It could be 5. I'm really not sure. I suppose it depends over time, and that could vacillate from year to year. That could be one student or no students next year. As sometimes that's the case when we approve co-op agreements. We have 1 student or 0 students the majority of the time, but it exists for an opportunity. But I would imagine that if there were numbers issues and we needed programming or different levels, that would be considered at the time when people, when the season is in place.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have nothing under building and grounds, so moving into curriculum, assessment, and instruction. We have for us the availability to take a look at the 2019-2020 school calendar. Any comments? Dr. Leck?
So I apologize. That should be linked, but apparently it is not. I put in board memo 58 today, and linked that in. So I apologize, but you would have to look in your folders for that. The reality is schools across North Dakota are really struggling. We were hoping and praying that by this point in the year, we would have a greater level of clarity on what's going to happen, one way or the other, in terms of the graduation ceremony. We know, I can't say it enough, graduation is the capstone of the K-12 experience, and a milestone like this, we need to passionately support. And that is a ceremony that we should expect and do expect to provide. It becomes problematic though, because there's guidance, the current guidance that we have has restrictions. We all know that this year is different than other years. And so we have to act in a way that's different than we have in other years. And of course, we have to work within the parameters that are provided through CDC, North Dakota Department of Health, and the governor's office to determine what we can and can't do. What I can tell you is that until we're told absolutely that we cannot, our intention is to hold a graduation ceremony on May 24th. That's going to continue to be our priority and our plan. If it can't, If the guidance says, no, that's not going to be an option, and hopefully we know more in the next couple of days, but we just don't know. But what we do know though, is if it's held on May 24th, as has been regularly scheduled, we would have to limit it in terms of guests to make sure that we can meet social distancing guidelines. We would want to and try to broadcast and live stream it. So even if you are unable to attend, that you would still be able to support those seniors in the class of 2020 virtually. The more difficult question though, is what happens if that isn't? The governor has been working with the Department of Public Instruction on creating some guidance on graduation. Of course, that's coming very quickly for all of us. And I know Mr. Gaylor has been chomping at his nails, trying to make multiple different plans based on what could be and what could not be an option. And I know we have provided out a survey, and we've gotten a ton of great feedback. We've got a ton of responses, 168. And what we found out from that is that, as we expected, the ceremony trumps the date. So the continuing to have a ceremony, whether it's in June or July, was the preferred option for 78% of those 168 respondents. And those were students and their families. So we know where people would prefer to go. But one thing that I think is important that everybody recognizes is that with the current executive order that's in place, that does not allow students on school property. And we've had a lot of questions about Ernie Gates football field. Well, couldn't we have the ceremony on Ernie Gates football field? That's school property. School property, that executive order continues not just in school buildings, but on school campuses. And so Ernie Gates football field would also not be allowed. And I know the city has been great and has been very responsive to us, but any city activity through May 31st would require special action by the city council. And that's something that would likely happen, but that's something to be aware of as well. And so what would happen if we don't? What happens if we have to move on? Again, our priority is to continue with May 24th, but if that isn't a possibility, Mr. Gaylor, Mr. Conway, Mr. Heinert are working on some kind of celebration for our graduating seniors on that May 24th date. And they're looking at a senior parade. They've been working with a lot of different people to make that work. And that's something that we can do, even if it's minimal, to recognize and celebrate those people on the regular day. So we want to have something happening on that regular day. And so if it was postponed, that physical graduation, the thought process would be that we would push it out as far as we can. We had looked at a couple different dates in June and July. I talked again with Mr. Gaylor this morning, and he recommended that we look at the morning of Saturday, July 25th. The reason being the morning, of course, it would be cooler in the morning. And that wouldn't conflict with church for those that choose to go that route and need to, and that wouldn't work for a number of families if we did it in the morning on a Sunday. But if we did it in the morning on a Saturday, on the 25th, that would work. And so that's kind of where we're thinking. I guess no action needed at this time unless the board is so inclined to make something. But to me, we wait until we get a little greater guidance from the governor on what we can and can't do. But just ensure that we provide the guidance that our intention is to have it on May 24th unless we're told that it cannot be. Recognizing that it would have to be meeting all social distance guidelines.
Heidi.
As a mom with a senior, I do appreciate the survey that was sent out to both parents and students. And I think that just having students be able to express what, their options and what they would like, I think just in itself was really helpful. And by the response you got, I think people were very interested in sharing their thoughts on it.
I think as a community, it's important to recognize our seniors at the end of their year. So I am pleased to hear that something, even though small, will still take place that weekend for them to recognize the culmination of all of their efforts. My heart breaks for them. I can't imagine a senior year of high school like this. And so we want to do everything we can to support them and to show them that we're with them. And although we can't shake their hands right now and say good job, that we can lift them up and we can support them. I think a May 24th, as you mentioned, with unless we get something specifically directing from DPI to say, here's exactly what you, very prescriptive of like, here's exactly what you can do. Here are the rules in which you must follow in order to open up your building to hold something like this. I just don't see a May 24th, some semblance of a ceremony happening unless we get that from DPI. And then hopefully we can have something on that Saturday, July 25th. So I think aiming towards that is probably going to be our best interest. Melissa?
Yes. I have been hearing from several parents already that work weekends and have days that they need to get off already that far in advance. Is there any way, obviously we're aiming towards that May 24th, but is there any way that we can set a secondary date so that they can plan to have that time off and say, okay, aiming for May 24th, if that doesn't happen, here's the secondary date that it will happen so that they can make plans?
So,
I just don't know if we can necessarily say that it will happen July 25th. I mean, we can certainly say that, that's our secondary option, but with the way a pandemic works, we may not be in any better spot for group gatherings on July 25th than we are today. Dr. Leck?
well, I was just going to suggest that unless there is a conflict from the board, the intention would be to take this board memo, make it a press release, and say exactly what it says, that our intention is to have it on May 24th. Unless we can't, then our next date is Saturday, July 25th. And if we can't do that because of what the environment looks like in July, we'll know that closer to July. And if we have to move it again or do something different, that would be the intention. But it is trying to be very clear, just for the reasons that Melissa and Heidi talked about, that people have plans they need to make. And we're going to know very soon if May is an option or not. And that's also one of the reasons why we wanted to set it as far down the summer as is reasonable, knowing that we're already going to miss some kids. Because if we have kids going off to service, July is not going to work for them either, and they're going to miss out.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not the preferred option. But if the next best option is sometime in the summer, personally, I would want to push it as far as we can to make sure that we can have as traditional or have that physical ceremony, unless it's absolutely impossible to do so. And that's kind of where the thought process is. And as others have said, our heart breaks for our seniors. This is the capstone to their whole career in education, and such a loss for these young adults. And it's very, very challenging. And I wish there was a different option, but I just don't see it.
So do we need a motion for that to be a press release or no?
No.
Okay.
I think we're all in agreement of what is stated in the memo. And we all cross our fingers and everything else that we have that something will come about for May 24th so that everybody can participate. Any further needs, Dr. Leck, on that?
Not for me.
All right. So moving on in our agenda onto finance, can I have a motion to approve the bid of asbestos abatement in the air monitoring in the amount of $22,425 to Horsley Specialties? When you make the motion, could you also please summarize what is being taken place? Jason?
Jason Rohr, I move to approve the bid of asbestos abatement air monitoring in the amount of $22,425 to Horsley Specialties.
Heidi?
I'll second.
And I'd like to just provide clarification for the discussion point here is that this is for abatement taking place in Lincoln Elementary to get our air handling and such in compliance.
Part of the boiler project.
Boiler project. Steve?
I have a question on the bid. The bid that we're approving, the 22,425, states that it's combined cost, but then down on the bottom, there's a per unit cost for fittings and installation, and the two bidders, their costs are much different on those. Is that included in the bid that we're approving, or where does those numbers? Having the higher numbers just doesn't seem to make sense that they got the lower bid. I'm just curious about that.
Sally? Sally, you're muted.
I keep wanting to click on my screen where it says muted. You know, it's a combined cost, Steve. If you look at it, you could see that, you know, it's a combined cost of air handling and the asbestos abatement. And like Jennifer and Rob alluded to, this is for Lincoln Elementary to prepare for making sure everything is abated for asbestos, and the air handling is done for the boiler project in Lincoln.
And this goes through One Engineering, that they are the engineering firm that's supporting. So that's the bids are reviewed by them as well.
Okay.
Trio Environmental is doing the environment.
Or Trio, sorry.
Trio Environmental is doing this portion of it. One Engineering is doing the, you know, the entire boiling project, but the asbestos abatement in this portion is done by Trio Environmental. So, yeah, it went through them.
Thank you, Sally. Steve, did that answer your question?
I suppose.
Any other questions or discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to personnel, can I have a motion to approve the request to rescind leave of absence for Tracy Gustafson? Heidi?
No, I make a motion to rescind the leave of absence for Tracy Gustafson. This is Heidi Larson.
Second, Roger Howard.
Any discussion? Jason?
I guess my only question is, I'm assuming this is all legally kosher, that once, you know, leave of absence is approved, that it can be rescinded. I'm assuming that that's been looked at.
Yeah, it's a request based on the negotiated agreement that you could, if the board rescinds the request, that person has the continuing contract.
Any other discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the hire of Darian Lund as band instructor at the high school at a salary of $45,889.50 for the 2020-2021 school year upon successful background check?
Oh.
Let me get to my motions first here. Can I have a motion, please?
This is Roger Howard. I'll move that we hire Darren Lund as band instructor at the high school at a salary of $45,889.50 for the 2020 school year upon successful completion of the background check.
Jason Rohr seconds.
Sally?
Just answer Melissa's question without reading it all. 9 through 12 band instruction and jazz band. So just FYI, 3 years in Oaks. So just so you have
Thank you for that. Is there any other discussion? Unmute your mics, please. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the hire of a pre-K special education teacher at Gusner Elementary at the salary of $53,804.50 for the 2020-2021 school year upon release of contract and a successful background check?
Melissa Gleason, I motion approval to hire as pre-K special education teacher at Gessner Elementary at the salary of $53,804.50 for the 2020-2021 school year upon the release of her contract and a successful background check.
Greg, I will
About
second.
10 seconds.
Ooh, two of them at the same time. I picked Greg. Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to policies and procedures, can I have a motion to approve the amended technology acceptance use policy for staff and students, ACDA?
This is Greg.
I'll move that we amend the technology acceptable use policy for the staff and students ACDA.
This is Greg. I'll second.
Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the amended bullying policy, ACEA?
Jason Rohr moves to approve the amended bullying policy ACEA.
I'll second. Roger Howard.
Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have motion for an approval of the first reading of the staff student relations non-fraternization policy, DEBD policy?
This is Diane Hansen. I motion to approve the first reading of the staff student relations non-fraternization policy, DEBD.
Second, Roger Howard.
Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the first reading of extracurricular transportation, IEAF policy?
This is Bob. I move we approve the first reading of the extracurricular transportation IEAF policy.
This is Roger Howard. I'll second it.
Any discussion? Heidi?
Hi, I just had one thing to consider in here. I was just trying to find it here now, but there is a kind of the one line in there kind of said, oh yeah, here it is. Parents are strongly discouraged from allowing students to drive to and from extracurricular activities. I'd actually like to see the policies saying that students are not allowed to drive to and from extracurricular activities without written permission from the superintendent. I think that there would be a very rare situation, something that would, have to be more extreme in order for us to allow a student to drive. So I'd like that to be considered to be written into the policy.
Dr. Leck?
I think I shouldn't say I think that is the intention of the policy is to make that to be a very unusual circumstance, but that could be a very easy change to make, which I'd be happy to provide some language that, if I heard you correctly, say just to define that that strongly discourage and make that into are not allowed without prior permission from the superintendent. I really think that the intention is to limit the amount of time that would happen. So that seems to me to be very in line with the intent of the policy.
With that slight change in the wording of the policy, would we need to table this motion?
Well, we could bring it back for another reading.
Okay, all right. Any other discussion? Steve?
That's in regard to out-of-town events, I assume. I would hope they could drive to the high school for their home events.
Correct.
Any other discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on in our agenda for tuition, can I have a motion to approve the tuition agreement of a Jamestown kindergarten student to attend Pingree Buchanan Public Schools for the 2020-2021 school year?
Melissa Gleason, I approve a tuition agreement for Jamestown kindergarten student to attend Pingree Buchanan Public School for the 2020-2021 school year.
Diane Hansen seconds.
Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to other, can I have a motion to approve the 2020-2021 middle school handbook?
Diane Hansen motions to approve the 2020-2021 middle school handbook.
Roger Howard, I second it.
Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I'd like to have a final reminder for those of guests that are with us this evening as attendees for a public meeting. If we were holding this as normal in person, we would have you sign in for the record, which your name is included for the minutes. And since we are having to do this virtually and you sign in virtually, we do ask that you use your names when you can sign in so that we can record that for the public record. If you could, so please, attendees, put your names in so that that can be done. If you're unable to change your names, you can email myself or Dr. Leck that you were unable to change your name, but you were, and what your sign in was on the attendees, so that we can go ahead and get that recorded. Thank you so much for your cooperation as we do these meetings virtually over Zoom. With that, are there any items for future agendas? Jason?
Maybe not for a future agenda, but are we considering, with the situation we're in, recognizing retiring teachers somehow?
Yep. We just talked about that at last week's administrative team meeting. We still want to honor, it's just going to look different. It's kind of like graduation. Those things happen at the building level. So building principals organize. We don't do that at one activity. It's designed at the principal level, or at the building level, excuse me.
Thank you.
Heidi?
And just extending on that, just a shout out to all of our teachers in the district for Teacher Appreciation Week. So we definitely appreciate all their service, and particularly during these trying times, I know that they've gone to great lengths to connect with their students and families, and it's really appreciated, and it's really made a big difference for our students and their families. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So meetings to be scheduled. We have a health insurance committee meeting on Monday, May 11th at 3:30, and that will be done through Zoom. Our next regularly scheduled board meeting is on Monday, May 18th at 5:15, and again, that will be done through Zoom. Is DPI planning on having meetings with Superintendent Kirsten Basler on Wednesday this week? I have not received any notification, but I would like to make it noted for the agenda if anyone knows.
That's been the standard, so I would expect it to continue. What we have done is post them publicly, and we'll continue to do that. So I think that's the best we can do right now.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other meetings to be scheduled? Okay, well then, as with that, a reminder to complete your monthly superintendent evaluation sections 2 and 3, and to please also click on the adjournment and let us know how the meeting went for you. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.